LJ.
So, Patrick, did you think to yourself ever that Alpine Houndmaster might be the best card in the set?
Yeah.
But that never proved to be true until now.
Well, I don't know if it's even true that it's the best card in the set. However, it's certainly, dogs are here and they are ready to play. You're talking about the Random Octopus's most recent Magic Online Challenge deck?
I was looking at Mark Heredia's Boros Winota deck. I don't know, maybe they're the same deck. It's an Alpine Houndmaster, Alpine Watchdog deck, but it adds a new red-white card from the newest set, Strixhaven, which is Blade Historian. Are they the same deck?
No, but let's go with that one.
All right, so I just thought this was a super novel thing to have happened. So you got Winota Joiner Forces, right? This is a card that likes humans, likes non-humans. Both of those things are needed for Winota to do Winota's thing. And Alpine Houndmaster is a card that is itself human, but finds you multiple non-humans to rock and roll. And all these cards are red and white, but apparently in order to come together, you needed two things. One, Pack Leader, which is in the same set as Alpine Houndmaster, but is an amazing synergy in this deck. And it looks like Blade Historian from Strixhaven is the glue that puts it all together.
Yeah, so, this card is absolutely incredible. Blade Historian, so just to begin with, a 2/3 with double strike, that's like not nothing for 4.
No, it's effectively, all other things held equal, it's a 4/3 on attack, right? That's kind of how you could think of it.
In many ways. It's better with Showdown of the Scalds, and it's worse with Embercleave. But
it is. It's like the only card that's worse with Embercleave.
But it gets spicy because Blade Historian also gives your entire board double strike, which is just an absolute beating. This is just, even with no Winota combos, just straight up, I think this card's great. It's, and we talked about this in a previous week. Like I told you, I'm a big buyer on this card just on its own merits, right? But Winota, Blade Historian is basically a 7-drop human. It just happens to only cost 4, but it's like as powerful as a 7-drop human.
Oh, yeah, it's ridiculous because you're already attacking with all these other things, right? Like, in order to get the Winota trigger and Blade Historian, I kind of ape in the Agent of Treachery spot. A lot of these other creatures, and you could certainly on an attack turn with Winota have mana open, have abilities like give +1/+0 to other attacking creatures, or pump +2/+0 for mana, right? Or Pack Leader gives all the other dogs +1/+1. It widely creates resistance to combat-based death and removal, etc. at the same time.
Yeah. But it's also just a lot of material, a lot of rate. Like you're just getting an incredible amount of damage. And it's another virtual haste card.
Yeah.
Like when you play Winota, it's basically virtual haste. And the same is true with Blade Historian, making this kind of Boros deck have absolutely brutal turn 4s. And what's particularly nice about this build is that if you hold up your kill spell, because you're like, man, whether they play Winota or the Historian, I need to use this 3-cost kill spell or 4-cost kill spell before they can attack, right? And that is when you drop Showdown of the Scalds as your turn 4 alternative.
Showdown of the Scalds. It's nice that this card is seeing some play. When that card came out, I was just like, it just doesn't seem very good to me. I'm glad it's somewhere,
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, this card it's barely, scraping the surface of playable, as it's only made a 2 of in Mark Heredia's deck. But Mark has a lot of other sweet 4s, so I guess I can kind of understand that.
We talked before about what the right mix of Igneous Cur and Alpine Watchdog, and it's nice to see 3+3. That's somebody whose Houndmaster means it,
Yeah.
What do you think of just 3 Selfless Savior? That kind of stands out to me.
I think that, like, Selfless Savior is obviously a very good card. Seems to play in a lot of different archetypes. It's obviously a very good 1-drop in an attack deck. I think
it even has good types.
In this deck especially, yeah, it's a dog. But I think that if you're trying to cut to 60 cards, you decide you want to have 24 land, you need 4 Alpine Houndmaster, 4 Winota, and 4 Blade Historian to kind of put it all together. I think Let's Selfless Savior was just 61. That's the feeling I get when I look at that.
Yeah, but you're saying the Bolt Hound, like the 3rd Bolt Hound, has to come before the 4th Selfless Savior?
That is a very astute question. I would actually just go with, this is a deck that's got 2 copies of Temple of Triumph, 4 copies of Fabled Passage. I think it might just not have untapped white on turn 1 every game. And that's
fair. That's a really good point. And there's no other 3s, so you're getting a little bit more mileage out of the Bolt Hound anyway. I could buy that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, if you were going to play like a 75-card deck, an 80-card deck or whatever, there would be 4 copies of Selfless Savior. There's no question about that. But I just think, like, here, had to make a cut. You know, there's 7 planes, okay, 4 pathways. That's not even 12 copies of white on turn 1.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you actually want to draw 2 Selfless Saviors. I could buy that. I would keep an eye open for if there's a spot to get the 4th one in, because I just like protecting Winota so much.
Oh, sure.
Plus, I like the extra hit, like for the extra non-human for Winota.
Actually, that's an enormous point, right? Like, you've got just that if you can spend mana on a Selfless Savior on turn 1, you're just a creature up, right? Like, because depending on how your mana falls out, you need to get a certain number of creatures going prior to attacking with Winota. I mean, also, actually, not for nothing, a mid-late game Selfless Savior isn't the worst because it's cheap, right? So you could just showdown it, and that's just a cheap hit for showdown.
It's also just nice to have an extra creature attacking to make your Embercleave cheaper. Plus, it's nice to be able to protect the creature you put the Embercleave on.
I like all those reasons. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm cutting an Igneous Cur. That's not. No. Maybe I'm cutting a Bolt Hound, not an Igneous Cur. I apologize. They're both red and they're both from M21. I think maybe it's just. I think the Bolt.
This is going to be sacrilegious, but I just moved the second Showdown of the Scalds to the sideboard.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's weird to me. I mean, very clearly, Showdown to Scald. That's a top 10 card in Standard, right? Irregardless of archetype.
Maybe it's pretty good.
It's up there, right? Top 20
it's pretty
card
high.
for sure.
For sure.
So I guess there's curve considerations. This deck has a lot of 4s,
right?
And it out of sideboard, it has a lot of 4s, right? It has like the Akroan War on 4 out of sideboard, and
yeah, that's for a little bit different of a matchup than the Showdown. But so, what do you think of this in contrast with the style of Boros deck, like over in the
talking about
Magic Online Challenge? Yeah, Random Octopus's Boros deck, making use of the Venerable Warsinger. Now, this doesn't have the dog thing at all. It's just good cards, right? Bone Crusher Giant, Elite Spellbinder, Giant Killer is a little exotic, but good in the format. Luminarch Aspirant, Seasoned Howlblade, Selfless Savior, Skyclave Apparition, Usher the Fallen, Radiant God of Worthy, Maul of the Skyclaves, Showdown of the Scalds X4, and then, of course, Venerable Warsinger.
So, a couple things going on here. First of all, this isn't just good cards in Boros. It'll sneak up on you because this deck still has cards like Needle Verge Pathway, but this is a snow deck. This deck has got 4 Fabled Passage, which are essentially snowlands in this deck, 14 Snow Basics, and 2 Faceless Havens. And this comes into play because it has cards like Frostbite in the sideboard. So just off to the side, it can activate a Faceless Haven, and it can use a Frostbite. So it's a little bit different. I like the fact that this deck exists.
Wait, so what does Frostbite is that just because it's new? Because I'm talking like, what do you think of actual Venerable Warsinger in the deck? Like,
well, I think that the whole existence of this deck, I think, is based on the existence of Needle Verge Pathway, because this deck is essentially a mono white aggro deck. If you look at it like the main cards in it, it's a very similar style as the mono white aggro deck, like PV played, for example. But the red cards in the main deck are Bone Crusher Giant and
Showdown.
And Showdown and the Venerable Warsinger that you mentioned. You're just like, oh, is that what makes this archetype? Are these also good? It's weird to me to even ask this question because there's only 3 copies of Bone Crusher Giant, which I think might be the best fair card in Standard. But its entire sideboard is red. So outside of 2 Glass Casts, it's got Ox, Phoenix, Relic Robber, Rolling Vortex, Redcap Melee. All the rest of the cards in the sideboard are red. So
one of the things that really stands out to me is that Ox and those Phoenix of Ash helping give you extra ammunition against rogues. Because we talked about what it's like if you had to face rogues with mono white.
I think that that's an amazing set of tools. And I would guess that Random Octopus knows the right number of Oxes and Phoenixes to play in order to get just enough edge against rogues. Because they could very well have just played like 8 and instead chose to play 1+2. Okay. But the question you asked initially was about Venerable Warsinger. I think this card...
And the reason is because of the 3 drops. Obviously, the 2 Venerable Warsingers are competing with Raidane, Bone Crusher Giant, Elite Spellbinder, Skyclave Apparition. Like, this deck's 3s are unbelievable. Maul of the Skyclaves.
But that's also the key to the Venerable Warsinger, right? So Venerable Warsinger is a 3 casting cost, 3 power creature with trample, right? And its ability is to get a creature with a mana cost of X or less, where X is the damage that it does. It has 3 power itself, could potentially combo with Maul of the Skyclaves, could potentially combo with Showdown of the Scalds, has trample naturally. There are no creature cards in this deck that are 4 or more. So even though it seems like it's competing with them, it's actually highly, highly synergistic with every 3 casting cost card in this deck.
Right. Is it better than the 4th Bone Crusher Giant?
I think that I would play the 4th Bone Crusher Giant before I played the first Elite Spellbinder.
That's fair.
Right? I think like Elite Spellbinder is not a bad card at all, right? Random Octopus chose to play 2. I just think Bone Crusher Giant is, this is my opinion, the best fair card in Standard, right? So it's really, really good against creature decks. It's serviceable against rogues. It always has text, right? You can, even when you have a weird draw, you can hassle Sultai with it and then play a 4/3 and they're just annoyed they have to deal with it. So I would probably play the 4th Bone Crusher Giant. Unless there's some color considerations, which I don't think are probably the case here, right? Like, this deck can afford to play colorless land.
Right. So what do you think? Which of the 2 do you prefer?
I prefer the Dogs deck because I find it to be hilarious. Because it's a Dogs deck. If I had to play for blood, I think I would still play the Dogs deck because Winota is the least fun card to play against. And I think that having my opponent have the feeling of playing against Winota would probably mean that I'm doing something right. That said, I like a lot of the things going on in Random Octopus's Boros deck. I think that it's interesting that this deck actually has a lot of the same trappings as the other Boros deck. For example, the only non-creature spell cards in either deck in the main deck are some number of Showdown of the Scalds and some number of equipments, right? So, I just thought that was an interesting thing to observe.
It's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from these Boros decks, but this same event actually contained several copies of the relatively new Nest versions. We've been seeing the Sultai decks based on the Ultimatum, but for instance, the Sultai Nest deck, it was actually in one of the next event over, the Magic Online Challenge for 425, but Chill Perico, MC Chill Perico, or Phil Hellmuth. Phil Hellmuth's version being a Kahira build, but the standard version is a Titan's Nest deck with it's another deck with 1 copy of Professor Onyx.
Yeah, so M. Chilperico, that version, that's not a 60 card deck, right?
Right.
But Phil Hellmuth's deck is a 60 card deck, isn't it? I'd have to go.
Well, actually, no. It is a 60 card deck. This is not a Yorion deck. This is 60.
Oh. And made room for Professor Onyx?
Yeah. Along with 2 copies of Reign of Revelation.
I mean...
And 2 copies of Curate.
I'm flabbergasted. The Professor made the cut in a 60 card deck. So,
well, it's the kill card.
Well,
because like what you're trying to do is just establish control, right? And you get into the big situation where what you're trying to you're trying to do the Professor Onyx, Alrund's Epiphany interaction.
So walk me through this, and walk me through it with the nest going on.
Okay, so let's say on turn 2, you do a little setup. You curate. You get the top 2 cards of your deck. You put any number of them in your graveyard, and the rest on the top of your library, and then you draw a card. Maybe you don't want either one, and you discard them both. So now you have 2 cards in your graveyard. Turn 3, play some interaction, defend yourself. Who knows, right? If nothing else, you can just thirst for meaning to get even more cards in your graveyard. What you're trying to do is on turn 4, drop Titan's Nest. So
Thirst for Meaning, you could potentially benefit by discarding an enchantment, but you don't want to discard that particular enchantment, it sounds like.
Well, you do if you have 2 copies of it.
Okay.
And besides, I mean, you also have, the old Shark Typhoon action too. And when you have Titan's Nest, which, by the way, you don't actually have to just tap out to play it on turn 4. If you've got stuff to do, it actually makes a great play on turn 5 or 6. It's a little non-intuitive because you're thinking, oh, I want to be ramping. But you are ramping because you can just immediately use the cards in your graveyard. Like in particular, if you've already foretold Alrund's Epiphany, you can go Titan's Nest on turn 6, then immediately get 4 colorless out of your graveyard, and then just play the Epiphany and take an extra turn. And then when you untap, now you just have a ton of mana, right? And the way that Professor Onyx is super, super sick is that when you have if you ever take a turn with Professor Onyx, you're so at risk of, first of all, you're just going to, tendrils them out so fast from the 2 a turn. But if you can actually just take an extra turn and get to use the extra card draw while you're tendrilsing them over and over again, it's pretty brutal. And that's to say nothing of just how devastating Professor Onyx's ultimate can be in an attrition game. So this deck is green for the nest, right? Is there any other meaningful green in this deck? No, it's just Elder Gargoyle is very meaningful for its plan, though, which is in the sideboard. Yeah. And there's a lot of copies. There's 3 copies of that card. And this is weird. Binding the Old Gods is, that's definitely a card I would play more of, but I think that you only have so much room at the 4. Still, I love discarding Binding the Old Gods to Ray of Revelation, if nothing else. Not Ray of Revelation, but Thirst for Meaning. Thirst for Meaning. I think it's weird that there's 1 Binding of the Old Gods and it's only in the sideboard. It just seems odd. For an even card. Do you like this as better as a 60 card deck? Is it so tight to 60 because the nest is so critical? No, you just have nothing to blink. Well, if you were going to play a Yorion style deck, I think you would at least start with more Binding of the Old Gods. Yeah, but that's just a different deck. But that just takes you down a whole path, So it's not out of the question. I'd have to see what that deck is, because that deck sounds like it's very little of the same cards. So this deck is very high on the card draw. It's got Teferi Master of Time, Shark Typhoon, Curate, That's because once you have Titan's Nest, you can just get such an incredible mana advantage. And so if you can like stay ahead on cards so that you can keep using the mana, you can just spiral out of control.
Reign of Revelation. Yeah, then it's like pretty like the rest of it is like kind of medium on removal. It's got like Heartless Act, Eliminate, Shadow's Verdict, and then like very, very light on permission, right? Like main deck anyway.
Yeah, because you're going to you're kind of playing like a Dream Halls deck in a way. Because you got to remember, once you have Titan's Nest, Strategic Planning costs only 1 mana, and it puts two cards plus the Strategic Plannings. Likewise, Curate can put 2 cards plus the Curate. So you end up in this spot where you've paid 1 card out of the graveyard and 1 mana, and you end up with 3 cards in the graveyard, and you've dug way deeper. So you can actually just cycle, because you very quickly cycle through your whole deck and find all your Alrund's Epiphanies, because each time you Epiphany, you get all your colored mana back. So if you ever untap, you just very quickly cycle through your whole deck.
So the objective here is just to burn almost anything that's card draw that can put additional things into the graveyard. I mean, pending if you need to hit a land drop, something like that, right? Like, just burn it all except for Epiphanies, get to the Epiphanies, and then cast 2 casting cost Epiphanies. Or whatever the casting cost Epiphanies is.
Yeah, you don't want to throw away your Professor Onyx, but yeah. For the most part, you're just digging through your deck looking for the Alrund's Epiphanies. And the idea is that you're digging faster than the amount of mana you have to spend. It's not deterministic, but it's sort of like if you untap with Titan's Nest and a reasonable number of cards in your hand, the odds of being able, as long as you can stick the first Epiphany, then you just, you start building your resources across every axis.
This is not a deck that auto loses to like 2 Duresses either, right? Like it's got 6 ways to win. Teferi can potentially, I guess Teferi doesn't actually kill them, but Shark Typhoon and Professor Onyx, it's like 5 ways to win.
Yeah. I mean, the Alrund's Epiphany tokens, it may not seem like they're hitting that hard, but if you just take all the turns,
yeah, if you take like 6 straight turns or something, probably feels pretty good. And then
obviously Shark Typhoon can just win very easily. So, like, you do have, 9 victory conditions.
What's probably pretty sick is Alrund's Epiphany helping Teferi get up there as well, right? Like, Teferi could get a lot of counters with Alrund's Epiphany help, and then you can take even more Teferi turns.
Right. All that's good.
That's a lot of 1/1s in. This is a really inventive deck. I'm very excited to see it, and I don't know. I think it's probably one of those decks that you kind of got to beat them before they get their machinery in play. Once they get the machinery in play, like you said, it's not deterministic, but it's probably not fun to play the next 4 or 5 turns. Because if you win...
Watch them.
Because they failed, right? And that's not fun. All right, you failed, right? If you don't win, you're only... it's not only 5 turns.
That said, when they fail, this isn't the type of deck that fails and has nothing left. It's the type of deck that when it fails has more than it started with. It just ran out of mana.
Oh, yeah, they might still win. Like, they just don't
right, you just better win next turn because it's going to get even worse for you next, if they get another turn.
I could see it being possible that they burn a lot of Time Walk type stuff and then don't kill you. And I think at that point that maybe they just have the wisdom to leave back some 1/1 tokens. They probably have a handful of removal cards, actually.
You got to remember, this is also a deck that actually plays the Shark Typhoon. And then just gets a dominating board presence from it.
Oh my gosh. Like, if you use Teferi's Ultimate and take 2 extra turns, like, you just have such a freebie. Right? Like, a lot of the time you're like, you tap out for the Shark Typhoon and you're like, I really hope this doesn't burn me, And then, like, but there's just no downside risk that you don't ever have to pass.
So what do you think of Phil Hellmuth's addition? Very, very similar deck, but packing Kahira in the sideboard, taking advantage of the fact that this is a creatureless deck, so Kahira is basically free. You can get the green mana for Kahira because you're going to Titan's Nest anyway, and even though you don't have the most green mana in the world, it's fairly free because you're also just pathwaying and trioming.
I mean, it's a free card. Like, it's a free card draw, and it's an additional way to win. I mean, what's not to love?
Exactly. So that's the key. Number one, I really like it as a way to win. But second of all, I actually like that putting a card in your hand makes Ray of Revelation and Thirst for Meaning better. And Teferi, for that matter.
I respect that, and at the same time, I would be kind of sad to discard it.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do.
I guess it's an utterly free card, right? Like other versions of
you
this...
paid $3 for it.
Well, I mean, like, yes, you paid $3 for it, and I guess you sacrificed a single sideboard slot for it, but other versions of the deck just don't have it at all, right?
Right. So what do you think? Is it worth it?
Yeah.
I like it too.
I think that if I were to play this deck, which is quite an assemblage of mythic and rare wild cards, I would definitely play the Kahira, which I drafted back when it was in the draft.
Nice. So we talked about Is It Dragons in some previous weeks, but there's a new addition to the Is It Dragons deck that in the second place list from the Magic Online Challenge on 424, KVZA packing Expressive Iteration. One of the cards we were most excited about, and here we're seeing it actually in Standard.
That is exactly like whatever you're saying. That's 1,000,000% where I'm at in terms of like thought process. Like next deck I wanted to talk about, next build I wanted to talk about. Expressive Iteration is, I mean, I think you said this card would probably be good in Vintage. It's clearly awesome here. It's
playable in Vintage, good in Legacy.
Yeah, and great in KVZA's deck.
Yeah.
So this card, obviously, this deck has a lot of things you can do on turn 2, whether they cost 2 or not. It's got Bone Crusher Giants. It's got Brazen Borrowers. So, if in a pinch you can discard your Magma Opus or you can foretell your Auron's Epiphany. You got a lot of things to do on turn 2, so don't feel obligated to Expressive Iteration that turn unless you really, really have to. Turn 3 is going to be perfect for you, especially if you can leave up a blue for that Mystical Dispute.
Yeah, in fact, I would say you generally don't want to play Expressive Iteration on 2. This is a card that costs 3 or more unless you are desperate.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be times where it's the right thing to do, but gosh darn it, you don't want to be doing the right thing in those cases.
I like the shift towards just Magma Opus as far as treasure cycling cards go, personally. It's just stronger, and I don't want to, the 7-drop, it's too many expensive, clunky cards.
Well, I think the 7-drop was more there in the previous builds we talked about because of just like kind of here's an expensive thing that you can kind of combo up with your Dragon Wrath or your 4-drop guy with Ward, like just another thing you can get in your graveyard, and in addition, you're actually exploiting like the treasure mana from it. Versus, I think, Magma Opus, especially combo with Galazeth Prismari and Goldspan Dragon, you actually want to cast.
Yeah, and I think you can.
Oh yeah, you certainly. I mean, you could just do it the fair way. Also, this deck has got 25 lands, but like we said, it's already got Expressive Iteration, and this is the definition of a deck that can defend itself on the way up.
So, do you like this style of Is It Dragons better, or like the relatively new Karuga build, like Funny Man 31399 played to a 14th place finish in the online challenge? This one, you obviously you have to make a little bit of sacrifice. You don't get to play any of the cards that cost 2 or less. The big thing you get to take advantage of is how much, Bone Crusher Giant and Brazen Borrower give you 8 forms of interaction for 2 mana, despite the fact that you're a Karuga deck and you're not allowed to play with cards that cost 2 or less. What's more, your Creative Outburst and your Magma Opus Treasure Cycle, ensuring that you're using turn 2 productively, plus Auron's Epiphany and Saw It Coming can be foretold on for 2 mana, plus you even have Mystical Dispute. So the amount of interaction you have, and of course that's, we could be remiss if we did not count the fact that you can use Torrent Sculptor's Backside as a 2-cost removal spell, even though you're not allowed to play with 2s.
So I am a really, really big admirer of all the things that you said, right? Like, in particular, I love the fact that you can cheat the Brazen Borrower / Bonecrusher Giant part of the deck. Like, that's just awesome to me. And
the treasure cycling, for that matter.
Yeah, I like that whole aspect of it. I like the fact that Karuga, just like a hero we were talking about a second ago, is a free card you can go get. And in fact,
but it's
more card
pretty
advantage.
darn good in this deck, right?
Yeah, it's really, really good. You just have to sign away your soul. And your soul is that expressive iteration. I don't know.
Yeah, but a lot of people weren't even playing the expressive iteration before.
I think they didn't figure it out yet, man. I think once they cast it the first time, they're probably going to fall in love with it.
Oh, see, I think this deck, I'm already in love, man. Besides, it's not like you're making the biggest sacrifices, dude. You get to play with Prismari Command main deck and Draconic Intervention.
So you like Karuga, or you like expressive?
Well, Karuga is where you get enough diesel out of Karuga that you can actually afford to do the rest of the stuff. I'm just saying that being resigned to having to play with those other cards is not the biggest cost, considering you get to have Yorion Light in the form of Karuga the Macro Sage. You're going to regularly be drawing 2 cards with this thing.
Yeah, and Karuga's really good. It hits
like a ton of bricks anyway, which works well with Auron's Epiphany.
So you're a Karuga guy.
I'm enough of a Karuga guy compared to how few cards that cost 2 or less we were playing anyway. I particularly like Torrent Sculptor's ability to get around it.
Torrent Sculptor is fabulous. It's
it's
fabulous both ways. The red backside is it's like a sonata. Just you're playing music, and it's like 7 points of music.
I also just like Draconic Intervention in the format as a sweeper, but in particular when you don't have 2-cost cards or 1-cost cards, it's important to have ways to catch up. And obviously, you got plenty of dragons too, so it's not like you're not already doing something there. So I think this is my preferred build of Visit Dragons, although I'd want to work on some of these numbers because this is kind of a suspicious amount of 2s and 3s.
I respect that. Look, format is youngish. You're knock the corners off a little bit, right?
Gotta try some stuff. So at the end of the day, we do gotta kind of talk about the elephant in the room, and that's Yorion. Right, like there's just so many Yorion decks, and in particular the ramp decks. Ben Weinberg, for instance, played an update to the Sultai ramp in the Satellite 8. This is another one Professor Onyx deck because of the package. Once you're on the Emergent Ultimatum plan, it's just so good to be able to go get Vorinclex, Professor Onyx, and Auron's Epiphany. And it's not like those are your only hits, but just that package, and that's to say nothing of the impressive mix of control cards you can play. Being able to find the Extinction event, or being able to get more card draw, or there's a lot of options, but the main thing is that you're trying to set up that Vorinclex, Professor Onyx, Auron's Epiphany package, where there's no 2 cards among those that doesn't just wreck them.
So, I know we see Professor Onyx taking the place of Valky a lot, like in the main decks. Do you think that's just how it's going to be?
If you're going to play Emergent Ultimatum, you have to play Professor Onyx as a one of, I think, if you already are playing Vorinclex and Auron's Epiphany.
Yep.
That said, I would still play one Valky.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so many cards to play with. That's the reason I'm surprised that... I mean, I have had certainly the experience, I assume you have too, of people just playing Valky on turn 2 against you. And
the thing is... That said, I've faced Valky a lot with people just drawing it eventually, and it hasn't been very good. Maybe it's right to just not play it.
Observation on my part on this deck, it's got a lot of like creatures and like just creatures that are not intended to win the game, which is a little bit of a different look for this archetype, right? So it's got
I mean, I don't know. Like, don't you want to just Yorion?
Yeah,
or are you talking about Coma and Elder Gargaroth taking over?
I mean, like, all right, Quandrix Cultivator, that's a card that you can blink. I got you. That's cool. It also advances your mana base, which is exactly what a deck that wants to get to cards like Emergent Ultimatum, Aaron's Epiphany, Seagate Restoration. You want to get up there in the expensive zone, so I get it. That makes a lot of sense to me. But, like, Elder Gargaroth is not, a Yorion forward card. It's not a Muldrifter. Here's a pretty good creature to play. I do think that is a weird main deck card for this archetype.
Yeah, it's definitely a metagame call, to be sure.
I mean, if you cast it against red and you're not dead, like... Actually, maybe that's just enough, right? Like, red has, for the last month or two prior to Strixhaven coming out, had a decidedly favorable game 1 against Sultai Ultimatum, especially in best of 1. That's it's pretty decisive even on the draw. So maybe that's the whole reason.
Another, I guess, companion. I mean, we've already talked about, God, so many, plus obviously there's Luris and the Rogues, but yet another companion seeing play is Jegantha the Wellspring. The first place list that Ed Bracamontes played in Satellite 8, the Nigh Adventure deck, uses Jegantha mostly for the classic, it's just a 5/5 for 5, I guess. But I didn't have to pay a card in case things stretch. But there is at least a little bit of action, because sometimes you get some Showdown of the Skalds turns. But the card in here that I thought was particularly exciting was the Lorehold command.
The one copy of Lorehold command?
Yeah, dude, just for the style points. Besides, I just want to see Lorehold command show up. This isn't a very good Lorehold command deck, but it's the beginning of the Lorehold command era.
I mean, I was kind of excited to see Felidar Retreat, which is one of the cards we were very excited about when it first came out, but hasn't been popular recently. But this doesn't also seem like a great Felidar Retreat deck to me. It seems like a fine Felidar Retreat deck. And an okay Lorehold command deck. It is, however, a great Showdown of the Skalds deck, and it's got 4 of those.
It's also a great Jaspera Sentinel deck, which I think is just an underrated role player.
So Jaspera Sentinel is exactly where my eyes went on this deck list. This card is seeing play. It's weird. It wasn't that popular prior to Strixhaven, but it's seeing play in a lot of different decks. Adventure decks in particular. So this card is G for a 1/2 reach, Elf Rogue, so it's got some types. And it has tap, and an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. So it's like a Birchlore Rangers, but for anything. It doesn't have to only be elves.
Right. But it has reach, man. That's actually just so not trivial.
Yeah, it can just jump in front of a potentially lethal Yorion or...
Well, no. It also just holds off rogues.
Kind of. Their guys have death touch and get to a second toughness really fast.
Not only for a little while, but he can help. And then you can hold off stuff like Clarion Spirit tokens,
You can. I mean, actually, this is kind of great against Epiphany tokens, right?
Yeah.
It's really good against Epiphany tokens.
I'm telling you, Jaspera Sentinel's just really underrated in the format.
Talk to me about Leonin Lightscribe. Like I said, this is like an okay Felidar Retreat deck, an okay Lorehold command deck, a great Showdown deck. This seems like a terrible Leonin Lightscribe deck.
No, dude. How many times do you need to do it? You got to remember, the Lovestruck Beasts, Heart's Desire, procs it. Shepherd of the Flock, procs it, And if you bounce an adventure card, procs it again. Bone Crusher Giant, procs it. Giant Killer, procs it. And then obviously you've got all these other, Kabira, you've got the Showdown of the Skalds, Felidar Retreat, Lorehold Command, and all that stuff. But the main thing you're doing is powering it off of adventures. And it turns all your Clarion Spirit tokens and your Rinky Dink Innkeepers and your 1/1 human. You've got all these things, and it actually lets you break through. You just very quickly kill them. You drop the Light Scribe and kill them in the same turn.
Oh my gosh, this was secretly an amazing Leonin Light Scribe deck.
Yeah, it's not obvious because you look at you're like, there's 9 spells, and Kabira Takedown is pretty hard to use with it. And it's not like you want to play it with 4s in the first place, but the key is how sick it is as, it's a more mild Edgewall Innkeeper, but it's Edgewall Innkeeper 5 and 6 of sorts. However, instead of drawing cards, it gives you a dominating one-turn board presence.
Oh, so it must be amazing for the mirror match, because sort of Selesnya-ish or Naya-ish adventure decks like this one have gained substantially in popularity recently. So, that seems great. Because a lot of people are just playing Toski in the main deck, for example, in their Selesnya deck. And that's cool, right? But it's a 1/1 versus, I guess, the Light Scribe just kills them, right? If you're in standoff, right? I've got 100 adventures, you've got 100 adventures, mine are all 5/5s, you're all 1/1s. Doesn't take very long to win.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. So I like the innovation.
Do you like cards like Felidar Retreat and Lorehold Command in lieu of cards like the Great Henge, right? This didn't stop being a 4 Lovestruck Beast 4 Bone Crusher Giant archetype.
So you're definitely playing a more tokens build, right? Felidar Retreat is helping your go wide plan, and you actually don't have very many. You do have the Bone Crusher Giant and the Lovestruck Beast, but you actually have relatively few ways to play the Great Henge on time, and they're fighting back. So I actually like the move away from the Great Henge.
Yeah, I guess it also would invalidate your ability to use Gigantha as a companion. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Although I gotta say, if it were a fight between the Great Henge and Gigantha, I think you know where my vote would go. Sure.
There is that the build you were talking about with the 2 Toskai Bearer of Secrets main deck. The use of Rip Apart, I don't think is anything too wild. I mean, it's kind of sure, if you actually get enough value out of it, that's fine. What do you think? Do you think it's actually super, super powerful and important, or is it just kind of a decent option, I guess?
I like Rip Apart a lot.
You like it a lot in the format?
Yeah. I think it's good. How do I put this? Rip Apart is the textbook definition of a card that's pretty good almost all the time, right? And I think that if you just stick that into a creature deck, it's decidedly better on average than Frostbite is in red aggro decks, and the red aggro decks all play for Frostbite. You know what I'm saying? Rip Apart is just better than Frostbite the way that Frostbite is typically played. It's not better than Frostbite in an Izzet deck or a Prismari deck, but it's much better than Frostbite in a red beatdown deck. So if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah. All right. So I know the dog deck, the Boros Hounds with Winota, is probably an early candidate for deck of the week. However, I have a dark horse. Game Night's 8th place list from the Magic Online Challenge on 425. Jeskai Transmogrify. This deck is my pick for deck of the week.
I love that deck.
It's a Luca Copperhole Outcast Transmogrify deck, and what you're trying to do is go get one of you've got all the tokens and stuff from you're packing Omen of the Sun. You're not actually that heavy on token making, But you do have Forbidden Friendship. You do have Omen of the Sun, and then you do have the Birth of Meletus. So you've got plenty, and that's to say nothing of the sweet Lorehold command token action. And then, plus, obviously sometimes you'll do stuff like use Elspeth Conquers Death to get there or whatever.
Mythos of Aluna can make a token.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And then you're finding one of your 3 copies of Dream Trawler or the Velomachus Lorehold. And obviously, part of the joy of Velomachus Lorehold is just how unbelievably dominating of a presence it is when you blind flip it. However, a subtly important part of the plan is that you can switch your Dream Trawler into a Velomachus on the next turn.
Yeah.
And it's deterministic.
And that's actually not nearly as bad as it sounds. Like, what if you have, like, an Elspeth Conquers
Why would
Death?
it sound bad? I told you this guy's the truth.
No, I'm just saying, like, losing a Dream Trawler is terrible. But, like, if you have, like, an Elspeth Conquers Death in play, right, it's fine.
Well, also, if you just have a Velomachus, if your life total wasn't at risk anyway, you could just completely take over the game with Velomachus.
So, I really like this deck also. I think.
What do you think of the spicy Reconstruct History?
I think it is spicy. I think that's what it's
remember,
there for.
You can so for sorceries, you've got interaction like the forbid. I mean, I guess it's board presence like Forbidden Friendship, or you've got your combo pieces like Transmogrify. For instance, you've got the interaction.
Luna.
Oh yeah, and you've got Prismari Command, Negate. The Lorehold command, enchantments. You got Omen of the Sea, a Sun, Birth of Meletus, Elspeth Conquers Death. Even just getting a draw 3 out of it is like a pretty nice little operation, right?
You can get a Planeswalker back. That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, if you happen to have your Luca.
Yeah, I think this is super spicy, and I think that. It makes sense to me that this would be your deck of the week. Like, this is exactly maybe you weren't thinking Jeskai because I feel like you were thinking more Mardu or maybe just straight Boros. But this sounds a lot like the deck that you were talking about when we first saw Lorehold Command, right?
And it just has that the splashing of blue for the Transmogrify action, but or rather to go get the Dream Trawler when you're transmogrifying. But there's a little bit more though. If you'll notice, look at the land, the mana base, Bark Channel Pathway. It's an interesting land for a Jeskai deck, right?
Well, that lets you cast Coma out of the sideboard.
Right. 1 Coma is a pretty sick hit for your Luca and Transmogrify. And it's not the worst that Luca could go find, if nothing else. But also the Coma being actually castable if the game stretches. Like if you're just going to use islands anyway. Because you're going to remember, this is a deck with no Fabled Passage. So it's not like there's even that big of an opportunity cost, And besides, you want the green anyway. The casting Coma isn't even the main attraction. That just doesn't come up that often. It's so hard to get 2 green. But the spicy part is getting to actually give killer to whatever you copy with Mythos of Aluna. Being able to make it fight, where it actually can just have one of your creatures, like you copy, whatever the big thing is, and then actually get to terminate their guy. Or copy a Dream Trawler and just go to town. But
yeah, I think that's a really cool aspect of the deck. And then, not for nothing, here's a Rip Apart deck. Rip Apart in the sideboard.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I think this deck is sweet. And I know a lot of people only play like 1 Test of Talents, but I actually think it's particularly necessary in a deck like this that has so few forms of non-board advantage or non-board interaction. Like when you have a lot of counterspells, there's less pressure on you to have that. But this deck has just 2 copies of Negate.
Like, do you think this deck might be well served by like having a little bit of a different game plan in the sideboard, kind of a let's build resources, kind of like sit back and like make them bite sort of game plan, like maybe play some Maze Mind tones?
Could not agree more. That's really standing out to me. And the extra Dream Trawler, I'm not so sure of. Like, maybe you get enough utility out of it, but like I feel like having a couple big ways to like really restock in case you need to grind or to build resources would be very attractive in some matchups.
Like, when do you even want a Dream Trawler? Like, I'm trying to think back to, I used to play Azorius in Standard like a year plus ago before everything shut down. And I was just like, did I side in Dream Trawler against red decks because I wanted Dream Trawler more regularly? Did I bring it in against other control decks because I was afraid they were going to counter all my kill spells? Like, I don't even remember. Right?
I think it's for against red in this deck, but
a 6 is a weird card to have against red.
I totally agree.
You could just have cheaper cards.
I don't want it. Yep, I don't want it. I think that you want to play with more of build resources game plan, exactly like you were describing.
But I do like it. What do you think about Shatter the Sky? There's like 2 Shatter the Sky in the sideboard, and that's it, right? There are a wide variety of sweepers you can play in Standard in these colors, and there's not.
I like Shatter the Sky. Yeah, I don't mind. I think there's just too many Sultai Ultimatum decks, and you could play one if you wanted, but I don't mind having in the sideboard. No, I always err on the side.
Other options, like versus...
No, I know. I like Shadow the Sky specifically.
Okay.
No, I like Shadow the Sky specifically. I just like how reliable it is, and I don't want to have an expensive spell. It's just not as easy to do that in this deck.
So what would you do? Just play some Maze Mind Tomes in the sideboard and maybe some cheaper permission spells?
Maybe. I'm not sure what the other alternatives are. I'd have to take a look. Maze Mind Tome's a good way to do it, though. But you got to be careful. A lot of people have, it's fine, though. Maze Mind Tome's so low investment.
What were you initially worried about?
I think Prismari Command changes the calculus because so many matchups where you would want the Maze Mind Tome, they get the Prismari Command for free.
Yeah, that's true.
And they actually get the better of you.
You are yourself a Prismari Command deck. Right. But I think that's probably okay, right? Like, if you got away with, like, 1 or 2 activations of it, you're probably okay. I mean, they could Prismari Command most of the stuff that you'd be bringing in that's kind of grindy like that, right? Even if you're bringing in grindy creatures. Oh, I don't know, Patrick. What about Robber of the Rich?
Could be okay. Depends on how much you want to switch it up, but I kind of don't like it because I really don't want to mess up the Teamer. I don't want to mess up the Transmogrify Luca plan.
Oh, yeah. You don't ever want to flip a Robber of the Rich. That makes sense. All right.
Well, awesome, man. What's your deck of the week?
I've switched my allegiance. I like this Jeskai deck. I think that it has the most potential to do something interesting.
Awesome, dude. All right. See you next week.
Right, bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, so jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left